Hi everybody, welcome to a special video where I celebrate, I can hardly believe it either, 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. Not only have I reached 1,000, but it's managed to stay above it. So I'm making this video like I've seen other people whom I respect out there. I thought I'd make a little video allowing you to send me some questions and I would answer them. Yes, the old Q&A. That seemed like a fitting way to celebrate all of your help in building my channel, as niche as it is for those of you who love Doctor Who music and jazz music. That's pretty much what I do, and I'm glad to have a lovely following. So I sent out missives on all my social media and have collected the various questions that people asked. And so I'm going to be answering them a bit off the cuff. I did scan through them yesterday. This is about, I think, 3-4 days since I sent out the word. But my answers will nevertheless be as spontaneous as I can make them. So why don't we get started with our first question? Naturally, I must first take questions from my wonderful Patreons. My Patreon started up as I began season 2 of the Dudley Simpson project and has continued through season 2.5, the documentary years. So let's start with those who replied to my Patreon message. First up is David Check, lovely man who co-produces a podcast. In fact, the Metebelis 2 podcast was, if memory serves, the very first podcast that anyone ever invited me to be on regarding my Doctor Who music. And both himself and Ben Haywood have become great friends of mine and have met them both subsequently. Not only they are Minnesotans like I am, but also have met them at Gallifrey 1 in LA. What are your favorite Who scores that aren't Simpsons from the 60s, 70s, and 80s? All right, that's a very fine question, and again, will require some pondering. If we go with 60s, I'm probably, it kind of has to be the Daleks. I think that music is just so splendid and so extraordinary. As you know, I've made at least 2 videos touching on the greatness of that music. So that would have to be one of them. If I was allowed to choose a second who was not Tristram Cary, oh, that's actually quite tricky. I'm sorry, I'm being discursive in my answers. You shouldn't be surprised. I have a love for Humphrey Searle's score to The Mythmakers, and also I admire very much the Raymond Jones score to The Savages, music made by a string quartet, a unique soundtrack in all of Doctor Who. There's some percussion as well involved there, but to have more than one string instrument was very, very rare. I guess I've chosen all Hartnell episodes, but there wasn't a lot of original music in Troughton's time, as I've touched on. Really, the only one who isn't Simpson and who isn't stock music is Don Harper's Invasion score. That's, of course, a great and memorable one. I guess if I had to choose one of those, probably Tristram Cary's The Daleks. In the 70s, a few composers who weren't Dudley Simpson. I have a great fondness for Cary Blyton's The Silurians. I think he's a very eccentric, idiosyncratic composer, and sometimes for me his scores don't work. The Silurians does. I think it is this side of brilliant more than it overcomes its eccentricities, I think. I'm a big lover of Malcolm Clarke's The Sea Devils. I know that's a very challenging score, but I, without a doubt, have loved that for many years. And also, I do have to shout out Jeffrey Burgon's scores to, well, both Terror of the Zygons and Seeds of Doom. I must admit, I like Zygons just a touch more, so I've become a little bit more familiar with that. The orchestration is really the wonderful thing about his scores. They're just so moody and evocative. And so not just his note choices, but his orchestration as well. 80s. Obviously, in the last 7 years since I started the channel, I have not been watching a lot of 80s Doctor Who for a reason you might detect. I think I would have to choose, in this case, I might choose only one, and that is Earthshock. I think it is a splendid return from Malcolm Clarke after 9 years away from the program. And I think his score coheres so beautifully. And I just love how it's basically made of 4 notes. The whole thing is just that do-do-do-do, those 4 notes run through the whole thing, and I love that. I will admit to you, I have considered making a piano suite of some of that music. Maybe that'll come in the future. All right, I better choose another one because it'll seem like I'm not being fair to the 80s. I have a fondness for Jonathan Gibbs' score to Mark of the Rani. Again, I'm suffering for a little bit of rusty memory regarding some of these. I have actually just bought 4 of the last 5 series on Blu-ray, and I haven't gotten to them yet, so they are not back in my memory again. But well, let me put it this way: I think Kef McCullough is all right. I like his stuff. It is obviously, it comes off as a bit dated, but I think he's got a great harmonic mind, and there's a lot about his stuff I like. There probably won't ever be a Kef McCullough is Doctor Who, but, well, who knows. Anyway, thank you so much, David, for your question, and thank you so much for your support through all these years. Another question from Patreon, Ruben Herfindahl. Hello, Ruben. I have been lucky enough to meet Ruben also at Gallifrey 1, and he is another Minnesotan. I don't know what's going on with Doctor Who in Minnesota, but yeah, we make some good Who fans there, don't we? So he asks, when are you going to do a deep dive into John Pertwee's most famous music, Rupert Hines' Who is the Doctor? I just know what you're talking about. I think it's the one where John Pertwee is doing some dramatic narrating over the Doctor Who theme or something like that. Forgive me if I am mischaracterizing that recording. Speaking of Don Harper, in a past interview, someone asked me about Don Harper's version of Doctor Who, which contains a lot of electronic distortion and weird violin sounds and such and such. And, well, I don't think I can contribute much to the conversation about that, but thanks for the question. Let's move on to some questions from Blue Sky. This is a question from Polly, another long-term fan of the project. Hello, Polly. Nice to hear from you. Dearest, lovely Jess, you know how to butter me up. Would you ever consider doing a Dalek movie medley for us, please? I'm actually very grateful that there are some recordings of that available, and that I would argue is a little bit more enjoyable for me. But what's wonderful about those scores is they have a jazz element to them, especially the kind of, I don't know, it's almost slinky or swanky opening theme to Doctor Who and the Daleks. And the Daleks Invasion Earth is clearly a jazz score with a nice strong piano part to it, I must admit. But these are jazz tunes, and what I would do is I would not need to recreate those. I would learn the tune and play them. These have great harmonies, and being a jazz musician, that is what turns me on. It's what turned me on to a lot of Simpson music, is the harmonies were so fabulous. And as a jazz musician, I love that because that's what makes me want to make up my own melodies on top of those harmonies. So actually, both of those tunes would be great for some sort of jazz performance, and well, I won't say no. Thanks again, Polly. My good friend Johan Morris. Fine composer, good friend. Last time I was in the UK, we met up together at Aldbourne and saw the church and saw the Blue Boar pub, and that was a great special trip for me. So, hey Johan, thanks for writing. And your question is, regardless of story quality, what are your desert island Doctor Who scores any era? Fine question. I guess this overlaps a bit with David's question regarding favorites of particular eras. I think I'd have to put Earthshock in that list again. I just really get spellbound by that soundtrack. Something about the timbres that Malcolm Clarke uses. It's such an interesting contrast, isn't it, to the Sea Devils? Because the Sea Devils is so raucous and, if not dissonant in notes all the time, dissonant in timbre. It's a very different vibe, is Earthshock, and I love it for different reasons than I love Sea Devils. I think I'd have to choose Earthshock. I mean, I'd probably have to choose the Daleks again. I'm sorry to not be original, but, you know, it kind of puts me in a similar mind, those questions. If I was going to add another one, because I haven't really been counting Simpson, I think I would say The Seeds of Death. I think Seeds of Death is fabulous. And I have great hopes that it will be released sometime in the future. Yes, you heard me. I understand the complete soundtrack, original soundtrack exists. So let's hope someday it gets a proper release, as has The Invasion and The Sunmakers and recordings like that. So let's hope so. So there's that. Let's give me one more, and I guess I'll take Terror of the Zygons. So what was that? The Daleks, Seeds of Death, Terror of the Zygons, City of Death, and Earthshock. Yeah, that would make me pretty happy. I would be comforted for many hours with those soundtracks. Thanks, Johan, for the question. Now some questions from my friends on Twitter. You heard me. And I actually got two lovely responses with multiple questions from Mikan Gul Kiwi, who has been a good friend of the project for quite a few years, and I understand a composer themselves of some video game music. So nice to hear from you, Mikan. Let me answer your questions. Which cues are easier to transcribe, synth-related ones or orchestra ones? Interesting question. I think synth-related ones, because they are in general keyboard-based, they translate to the piano much more easily. Orchestral-based ones, or let's say acoustic ensemble, Simpson's small group of 5 to 8 or 9 musicians, being not written for keyboard, or at least significant part of it not written for any kind of keyboard, it won't always translate to piano music. For example, I've had to cut out parts in order to make certain of my transcriptions playable. I'm thinking of Resistance from the War Games, the couple of extra filigree clarinet or whatever other instrument there, trumpet perhaps, that I couldn't manage. It ends up being what I call a three hands problem. If I had three hands, or I had written these transcriptions for two pianos, then I could add everything. When it's just me, I will sometimes have to leave stuff out for the sake of playability. Another time I had to do that was with Empire State Building. There's some little, throwaway kind of ideas that come from the xylophone and other instruments that Simpson throws in there. And I just couldn't do them. And that piece was hard enough as it was. If you saw me doing all this nonsense, so that was one of the first times I ever had to do something really challenging like that, technically. So in general, the synth ones are easier to transcribe. That doesn't automatically make them easier because they have their technical issues too. Particularly, I'm thinking of Axos Arrives and Space Buggy Built for Two from Claws of Axos, of course, and Colony in Space. Because of the way synths were designed then, it just was easier for Simpson to write parallel music. That is to say, a melody might happen and then it would be harmonized by the same interval and it would just sort of move up and down in parallel. Both of those transcriptions show that. But that requires some technical facility to be able to play those rather smoothly. It's not like I can do it like this. I have to go with it with one hand and the left hand is doing something else. So if you watch those, episode 43, 44, you will see how technical those actually are, even though the musical material is not always that complicated. Episode 44 is actually one of my secret favorites. Even though it hasn't got the most views, I think it's a super piece of music and comes off great on the piano. So I hope you get to check that out if you haven't. Okay, that was Mikan's first question. Is there a Doctor Who composer who is on par with Dudley? That is a loaded question because that's a lot to do with taste. I was attracted to Dudley Simpson primarily because I knew he was doing really cool stuff rhythmically and harmonically. There are other composers who didn't necessarily have to have that challenge. For example, some of the rhythmic complexity of Simpson's work was because he was working to 60 or 120 beats per minute. And so in order to hit the beats on screen, that would sometimes mean a kind of weird syncopation rhythmically, where his music hit in a surprising place. I think when you got to the 80s and the radiophonic workshop takeover, no offense meant there at all, but I don't think it was necessary to write in that way anymore. The technology had advanced in such a way that they could set their tempos to whatever they wanted. And I think for that reason, there's less rhythmic excitement, interest in some of the 80s scores. Sorry to talk, with a broad brush there. Again, I am a little rusty on some of those, and I'm sure I would be happy to be reminded of how wrong that is. But my thinking is, because of Simpson's working method, his music was as rhythmically intense and exciting, probably more than anybody else's. And so there's certainly composers who are on a par with Dudley, reputation-wise. Obviously, Richard Rodney Bennett, Humphrey Searle, Carrie Blyton. All of these composers have a reputation outside of TV and film. I'm just going to stick with what I like. Simpson drew me in for both of those reasons, and that is not to say that other composers lack that. I already complimented the use of orchestration with Jeffrey Burgon's music. Tristram Cary proved himself to be a really interesting orchestrator with his Dalek's Master Plan soundtrack, with just his acoustic tracks alone. And you have to admire someone like Carrie Blyton, who was willing to have a certain adventurousness orchestration-wise. Silurians is a perfect example of crumb horns and prepared piano. I mean, that you got to give him props for. I don't think anyone used prepared piano in Doctor Who. Prepared piano, the shorthand version is you put things on the strings or inside the piano, which alters the sound of the piano itself as you play it, whether you use the keys itself or you might pluck or strum. I did something like that in episode 11. Especially in the 60s and early 70s, Doctor Who and science fiction in general was a playground for avant-garde composers. And so that kind of wonderful experimentation and fearlessness is really to be admired and kind of got lost, particularly when technology became so simple and affordable. Once technology moved on, Tristram Cary didn't have to manipulate tape anymore. The technology made it possible to create strange sounds in a musique concrète kind of way without the manual labor. Okay, that was a super long-winded answer, Mikan. I'm waffling only because that's an unsafe question to answer. Not that I'm afraid, but it's a question of taste. But in terms of both rhythmic and harmonic interest in classic Doctor Who in particular, Dudley Simpson is the guy. I'm sorry, I haven't been talking about the new series just because I'm a classic series nerd, but there's a lot to love and there's a lot of great stories and great music from that time. I admire, for example, Segun Akinola's take on incidental music, which was vastly different from the very melodic, very orchestral, in my opinion, music of Murray Gold. I think his music is so interesting. I was super lucky in 2024 to get to interview him at Gallifrey One along with 3 other composers, including Dominic Glynn. It was fascinating to talk to them about their work and how they think about it. Anyway, super long-winded answer, and all that is by way of saying there's a lot of great music out there. For me, what Simpson was able to do was second to none. More questions from Mikan. Pay attention next time, everyone. You have to ask at least 3 or 4 questions. Was there ever a cue you wanted to transcribe but couldn't? Great question. In general, the answer is no. And partially because when I first started off in the project, I was very conservative about my ability to transcribe, but my ability also to realize the music on piano. That was always the goal of the Simpson project. I couldn't recreate it with instruments, synth or otherwise, but it was a question of the melody and the harmony. Could I do that justice on the piano? I will say that as the project, now known as Season 1, progressed, I got more confident and more willing to push myself and try things. I was able to do new transcriptions midway through the project, such as The House of Maxtable from Evil of the Daleks. I mean, it's piano music. I don't know why I didn't think of that. And The Sand Miner from Robots of Death. That was a real challenge. And that was, I was right to be conservative, but I'm really proud of how that came off. No, what happens is I can sort of sense how a piece might work, even if I don't know exactly how it's going to lay out on the piano. I guess I can hear that a piece might be playable or translatable. I can also hear when a piece is too spread out, which happens when you're writing for a acoustic ensemble. You don't have to worry about 2 hands. You've got 7 musicians who can play everywhere through the gamut and cover everything you want. That might not be possible to do with 2 hands. And so I didn't put myself in a position where I transcribed something and ended up saying, I can't do this. With, well, 1.5 exceptions. I did transcribe, when I was doing the sand minor transcription, episode 33, I did transcribe the music that became episode 41, The Hopper of Death, the climax music of episode 1 of Robots. And so that wasn't a failure, that just didn't find a place in the sand minor transcription, but it did find a separate place in the project, which I'm glad about that. I'm pretty sure there's only one piece, a snippet of a piece that I transcribed and didn't end up using. And it's actually from the very last transcription, the music for spaceships, episode 56. I had thought how nice it would be to start a spaceship piece of music with the weird clanging music that comes at the opening of Underworld, episode 1. We see sort of the vastness of space, the bleakness of space, and suddenly we see the TARDIS come in and the tenor of the music changes. I tried transcribing it and it just didn't sound good on the piano. That's a really important thing too. I have to be able to hear that it is playable, but also that it sounds good. That was always the point of the project, is to make something that I could play on the piano, that I hoped anyone could play on the piano, even though it might challenge them technically. I had this fantasy of creating a body of piano transcriptions that other pianists might be interested in playing. I do have to say that I have had Patreons who have been able to obtain copies of my transcriptions, and I hope to hear some of the results of their work in the future. If you're out there watching, hey, let me know. I would love to hear your version of these transcriptions. Yes, I did it, but it's not my music, it's Dudley's. And so I'm excited to hear that, I hope, in the future. But anyway, one transcription that I thought of that I have yet to do, may never do, but we'll see, is the opening music of episode 1 of the Android Invasion. It is cross-rhythmic, it is weird, the harmony's great, it's mechanized horror, and this is what I was thinking about before in answering your question. I could sort of tell that it was just not going to work. It was not going to fit on the piano. Because of the successes I've had with other transcriptions that I thought I couldn't do, the one that comes to mind immediately is Mr. Oak and Mr. Quill. That is literally a 3-hands piece of music that I managed to work out exactly how to play with 2 hands. And the choreography was quite intense. If you asked me to play it right now, I couldn't. It would take a while to practice. I guess that's the case with most of my pieces, but that one in particular would be asking a lot of me to try and play that. But that is one. Android Invasion 1 is something that, well, if there is a season 3, it is on the list. But as I get to season 3, I guess if, I'm more likely to come across pieces that I try that don't work out. Either they're unplayable or they don't sound good on the piano. So, although I say it myself, I've had a pretty good batting average in the sense of detecting when a piece will work on the piano. Thankfully, relatively few I have had to abandon like that because they just didn't work out. All right, Mikon, you are getting a luxurious set of answers. Is there any transcription you would like to see with an orchestra? City of Death. First of all, we've all now seen orchestras that will perform scores with the film while watching the film, or, well, I guess with TV. I don't know how much they do with TV, but the idea is basically the same. But of course, it wouldn't just be the ensemble, it would be an orchestration. But the electric piano or electric piano, is such a powerful, important presence in that score. There's a few of season 17 where that's the case. Well, certainly Nightmare of Eden. But that piece is the first one that comes to mind that would absolutely not only work as a sort of piano concerto, a piece of music with piano at the center of it and in dialogue with the other instruments of the ensemble. But it would be exactly the sort of thing where maybe I'm overestimating the draw, but how many people showed up to Doctor Who at the proms? They could do a live showing of City of Death and have even a small orchestration of the music with a piano-focused arrangement, a piano-focused arrangement. And so that would be, I think, fantastic. I would see, I'm either too modest or I don't believe in myself sometimes. I would actually I would love to hear it. I would love to be in the audience. I wouldn't feel that I had to be the piano performer, but that would be a lot of fun, I have to say, and it would be a good challenge for me to play with such a large group like that. And I wouldn't get to enjoy the story very much because I'd be too busy paying attention to my own part. But that is instantly one that comes to mind, and they could probably do it with others. I think the clips that we saw from the 50th anniversary performance shows that it is possible to take these pieces, orchestrate them, but also use them with the program itself. That would be absolutely tremendous, and I would love to have any part of that whatsoever. All right, thanks so much for all your questions, Mikan, and thank you for your plentiful questions. Okay, one more contributor from Twitter, Alex Baxter Scott. Hello, thank you for writing. Hope you don't mind 3 questions. Well, I'll try to answer 3. Here we go. What is your favorite classic Who score? We sort of already touched on that, I guess. One that I haven't mentioned, which I'm glad is back in everyone's mind again for an unusual reason, is the War Games, the final story of season 6 with Patrick Troughton. The War Games in color brought out a lot of that music again and confirmed that there was unused music that Simpson wrote and must have recorded that didn't end up being used in the program that Mark Ayres ended up using. I believe the soundtrack is coming out, so I'll be really excited to see that. I guess I better just add that on top of the other choices I've already made, because I suppose I've already answered that one. Which Dudley Simpson score do you think is the most impressive? Okay. Impressive. As I've talked about in the project, there's 2, not exactly halves, but 2 parts to Simpson's style of writing: pre-production and post-production. Post-production became much more about atmosphere, less about melody. Pre-production meant that the music was basically played as live during the recorded performances and are much more melodic. I think it's safe to say at least half and maybe even more of the transcriptions I've done have been from pre-production, season 7 and before. I really love, for example, Evil of the Daleks, which is basically a kind of prototype for the music to come, a blending of acoustic instruments and electronic manipulation and distortion of the sort we know Tristram Cary did well. That's a really wonderful score, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think it's hard to not talk about Genesis of the Daleks, which is impressive simply because of how really dark and sinister the score is, and what a great amount of musical continuity there is. When I did Music of the Daleks, episode 27, that was a transcription that kind of happened during the project, and I was able to finish it up just a couple of weeks before I had to record it, if I was going to record it in chronological order. And it's such a tribute to not just Simpson, but all kinds of composers who, because they are composers, they find a theme. I guess Simpson said it as good as any. Once you find a theme, you can do anything. You take that as your basis, in other words, and it influences the entire score. It doesn't have to be there all the time, but it can influence melody, harmony. It can influence how you characterize certain characters. It can be your way into a story. And again, I'm saying all this, and I haven't written a note of music for film and television. Maybe I never will. That's fine. I'm happy being a jazz pianist. But I admire the craft. And any composer who likes composing, I would say, wants to find that way in and wants to find that thread that they can use to help create the music they need for this 30-second scene, or this sting, or this 57-second piece, or whatever. That is what's really impressive about the work of film and television composers. We're also talking about back in the day, sometimes the composers had to estimate how long their pieces needed to be, and they would expect that a sizable portion of their music would not end up being used, or might be truncated or faded out or edited in some way. So you couldn't afford to be precious about your music. That's part of the business. In terms of, again, what you might call an impressive score, an impressive Dudley Simpson score, there's a variety of ways into that. I've touched on the scores that I really love, that I think create a lasting impression. You got to give him credit for the season 8 scores, and to a similar degree the season 9 scores. I guess season 10 as well. The manual labor that it took to make music on that suitcase synthesizer, the VCS3, just seems insane now. And the amount of effort that he and Brian Hodgson had to do. Let us remember that although Brian Hodgson may not have taken part in the composing, he was absolutely crucial, I would say, in the realization of Simpson's music for season 8 and probably 9 and 10. By season 9, I think he was on the Delaware, like Malcolm Clark was for the Sea Devil. I'm not sure about that, but it sounds like a different type of timbre, a different character of synthesizer than it is in season 8. But that's a kind of impressiveness, is that he was able to do it. He was able to pull it off and yet make it fairly musical. It doesn't always work. I don't think he was necessarily convinced of it himself, but it's impressive to see that kind of result. And then one can't not talk about City of Death again, because he saw those scenes of running through the streets of Paris and absolutely stepped up his game to probably the peak. It's what everybody talks about if they know Dudley Simpson. They talk about that score. And that's right. It may not have been a very important score to him at the time. It may not have been a very different score, except for the fact that he created this music for scenes of running, if not down corridors, down the streets of Paris. So there's a lot. If nothing else, Each transcription that I've done has allowed me to understand even more how impressive Dudley Simpson's work is, and why he became indispensable for so many years. And at least for the music he produced, quite right too. One further question from Alex. What was the moment you fell in love with Dudley's scores? Oh, that's a marvelous question. There probably is no moment, because I am all feels. What I mean by that is I don't have specific memories, many specific memories of watching Doctor Who when I was younger. I didn't have to. We were lucky enough to have a VCR by the time I was about 8 or 9. And that is the reason why eventually every Doctor Who that still existed, I had recorded off of PBS onto a VHS tape. So I could relive them over and over again. Something that if I waited for the BBC VHS releases to come out, I would be starved. And yet I could indulge in watching Doctor Who whenever I could. So that is so extraordinarily lucky. So it's impossible to say. It must have infected me right from the beginning, because the first stuff we watched was Tom Baker seasons 12 through 14, 15, something like that. I'll have to refer to the broadcast website to confirm what we actually saw, but I'm pretty sure it was about 3 seasons. Then on repeat, and then expanded later, and then expanded backwards. And so sometime around 1990 or 91, I would have had every Doctor Who from William Hartnell to Sylvester McCoy that they had shown on PBS. So, I mean, that's all I can say. Sometime around then, it must have gotten in there. But the simple fact is, this whole project thing took ages to gestate in my mind. It didn't occur to me until the mid-2010s that was a thing I could do. And it, as usual for me, happened just kind of on a spark of inspiration. I decided to transcribe the Master's theme, and from there it went on. So it wasn't that the Master's theme inspired me first, it was just accessible at hand. And then I was able to just go from there and follow my nose all the way through, and have continued to follow my nose for 57 pieces of music. So yeah, you might be disappointed in that answer, because there isn't a specific moment for me. But I can pinpoint the moment where the idea of the Dudley Simpson project began and started to blossom, and that was sometime in 2016 when I transcribed the Master's theme. Alex, thanks for all your questions. Okay, and finally I have some questions off my Instagram account, and let's account for those. Let's start with Cy Hart, my friend Cy, another longtime Patreon, and one who I've been lucky enough to meet at least once on some of my visits to the UK. So thanks for your question, Cy. Let's go for the biggie. What do you think is Simpson's greatest score of all his Who work? And which is your favorite if that isn't? All right, yes. Not a dissimilar question, but what do you think is Simpson's greatest score of all time? I think in general, people will say City of Death for the reasons I've already talked about. And they're not wrong. Again, I love Simpson in some ways for different reasons than other people might. But there's so much to love that at this point, it's now really difficult to choose a favorite. Particularly because all of the transcriptions I've done have allowed me to gain such insight into the music that I used to say my favorite piece was whatever I was working on at the time. That was true, because suddenly I gained so much deeper respect for that music. as I was working on it, as I recorded it, as I edited my videos. Simpson's greatest of all his work. Well, yeah, I don't think it's possible to say anything other than City of Death. One I haven't mentioned, which has been a longtime favorite of mine, is The Ark in Space. That's a wonderful story, so that may be, intertwined with that. But that's a super score. Pyramids of Mars, obviously splendid. Ambassadors of Death is just so totally different from him. Fury from the Deep, I have a great love of that because it is piano and oscillator, so it's almost like one of the only piano-based soundtracks of the classic era. So those are splendid. Those are wonderful. Those I could listen to over and over again. Let's see, is that a satisfactory answer? I don't think I can add on to the things I've already said about my love for certain scores out there, but hopefully that's a good enough answer. Thanks for your question, Sai. All right, next, another longtime friend of the project, Jimster1971. That's Jim Sangster. Hello, Jim. Thank you so much for writing. Hiya, Jess. Love your work. Love yours too. Hearing the music transcribed to piano makes it so much clearer. Thank you. Are there any scores you've put off doing because they'd be too complicated to do on just a piano? Yes. In a way, I've kind of already answered that. That is the problem, isn't it? Is that it's not that I wanted to do everything. It's that I wanted to do pieces that I thought would sound good on the piano. So not everything warrants a piano transcription. The idea was never completeness. I must admit, it wasn't my intention to say, hey, these soundtracks don't exist. Let me make a piano version of them so people can hear them. That was kind of a byproduct of what I did. It wasn't uppermost in my mind when I started the project. It was just something for my own pleasure. And then it became a video project that was still sort of my own pleasure, sharing the pleasure that I'd gotten from these pieces. And only in retrospect did I realize that it filled a niche, a gap in the soundtracks, of the existing soundtracks of Doctor Who. So yeah, I've talked about pieces that won't come off on the piano, pieces that I don't have enough hands for. I feel like I have a good sense of what will work on the piano and what won't. And so that has served me well. But I did make a list, as I hinted at, I did make a list of music that I might attempt for season 3. I'm particularly interested in working on stories that don't have any representation, but that's not automatic. Again, the purpose is not completeness. But I hope to be able to add some repertoire to some other stories that aren't there yet. But anyway, thanks a lot for your question, Jim. Aha. And finally, I have 2 questions from 2 very good friends of mine, but who I will characterize as not we. That is, I don't think they care one jot about Doctor Who. They're just a friend of mine and are very sweet, actually, to contribute a question to this 1,000 subscriber video. So, well, thanks a bunch. Hell Creek, this is my friend Andy, a excellent playwright and actor. If you could take any full Doctor Who story and turn it into a full jazz album or live show, which one would you choose and what would it sound like? Fire emoji. Great question. Thank you, Andy. Something I've kind of touched on already. For example, the live performance of City of Death. That lends itself, I think, so well to a live performance. At least I sense that it would. Let's start with jazz album. Ambassadors of Death is pretty much the only really jazz-oriented soundtrack. And I say that remembering that an actual jazz musician, Don Harper, wrote the music for The Invasion the season before. I wouldn't say that all of his music is jazz oriented. He happens to be a jazz musician, but he didn't compose, well, he composed some jazz music that is on the release soundtrack, but some of that, quite a bit of the more jazz-oriented pieces didn't actually end up in the score. So it's jazzy because, for example, the Hammond organ is in it. The electric bass, or that kind of thumpy kind of electric bass sound is in it. It has a very 60s crime jazz sound to it. But in terms of what I would do for a jazz album, the thing for me is harmony. Because to make a jazz album, it isn't just playing the pieces, it's to improvise on them. And so there are quite a few pieces that I could grab, some of which I've already done. I managed 3 bonus episode performances of Simpson music that I turned into, well, made into a jazz tune that I improvised on. We've already touched on a few that might work. I can conceive of something like the Fish People from the Underwater Menace, that odd jazz waltz. Well, I shouldn't call it a jazz waltz, but it could be a jazz waltz, and I can hear the form and the harmony, and that makes it doable. It's possible to put together, particularly some of the pieces I've already transcribed, that have a tune-like structure to them, and that would make it possible to do a jazz album. Live show, I'm a jazz pianist, and one of the reasons I took on the project in the first place was I wanted to challenge myself as a performer to play music that didn't have any improvisation in it. And that's just a very different way of thinking that I wasn't really trained to do. But it has affected my learning because, of course, as a younger person, eventually, when I got to college, I had to learn Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and Debussy and all that stuff, and really get to know the vast variety of Western art music that's out there. And some of these composers affected and influenced jazz musicians in America in the 30s and 40s and so on. And so it would, the only thing I'd really want to do is not for the sake of Doctor Who, if it's for the sake of jazz, I'd want to do something like that. And there's probably enough tunes for me to make that happen, but again, the inspiration has to come, and well, maybe it will. Thanks a lot for your question, Andy. Bill Beggart, another friend of mine from the bridge world, my alter ego as a bridge player and teacher. Vis-a-vis Doctor Who, when did you embrace your status as a huge nerd, and what was the proximal cause? Long-standing joke between us. I'm going to answer your question seriously. Ha, take that. Well, I guess I must have realized it when Doctor Who started becoming a really important part of my life, which was, 8, 9, 10 years old. Yes, I have embarrassing stories as a child about how I, played Doctor Who at school, and I was one of the only people who did. Obviously, this wasn't a UK playground. This was an American playground. And Doctor Who was just finding its fan base in the early 80s, and I was part of it. Well, I was also a nerd because I guess I was kind of smart and had an unusual taste for things British in general. I enjoyed words, and I enjoyed a little bit off-kilter sense of humor. I now it's easier for me to articulate. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it at the time. I love the absurd. I love language, and I love a certain sense of humor that is a little bit more common, I think, in the UK, but that's not to say it isn't here as well, and elsewhere, of course. But then, when I started attending conventions, I think the first one I went to, I was about, I want to say 13 or 14. maybe a little younger. Went to a few more, went to one when I was about 17 or 18. I still have friends from that time who I am in touch with and see regularly. And then I went to college to be a jazz musician. And Doctor Who wasn't important. I have to admit that although it was still an important part of my life, it was something that I enjoyed for the most part privately. Jazz was far more important, and Doctor Who wasn't part of my social makeup. Except for the few friends I had retained from high school. What nerdity I had transferred over to jazz for my 20s and 30s and even most of my 40s, as well as when bridge came into my life, and that became another career parallel to my music career. And like I said, making music from Doctor Who music was a very late inspiration. But I don't think I'm nerdy as some people. That's not a judgment call. I would say that I have my nerdiness, and I have no problem with that, because thanks to that nerdiness, I have the life that I have the friends that I have, and I get to live in the greatest city in the world making music and doing other things that I love and care about with people who also are kind enough to care about me as well. Yeah, so if I'm a huge nerd, so be it. I accept that. Thank you so much, everybody, for submitting your questions. Thank you for being a part of this celebration of my channel. Thank you for making this possible. Like I said, thank you particularly to my Patreons, who have been a major support, a vital support these last, I guess it's 4 years. I guess it would have been about 22 that I started, right? Yeah, would have been that. Yes, 22. Yeah, I think so. Anyway, seems like the sort of thing I should know. Again, thanks all for watching. If you're interested, join me at patreon.com/Jess Jurkovic, or contribute at ko-fi.com/Jess Jurkovic, and support the work of the future, whatever that may hold. And, next stop, 1,010 subscribers. Thanks again, everyone. Take care and stay tuned.